afternoon.
Good afternoon, Leenika.
I'm very, very excited to have this conversation with you, Sailaja, today, harnessing the power of diversity in the workforce. So we all know differences, diversity brings in more productivity, more innovation, more financial performance, 35% more productivity, 25% more innovation, 15% better financial performance. I have some questions for you around how does harnessing the power of diversity improves organizational cultures? What are your thoughts on improving organizational cultures, building stronger organizations?
So I think, Leenika, I think we are all talking more about diversity and inclusion, which to me is a good positive sign, right, compared to how it was before. And whilst we are talking about it, I think as organizations, we need to walk a lot more. What does that mean? It means that we need more active mentoring, right? We need programs where women leaders are actually identified and put through a career progression. We need women-friendly policies. I also look at this, right? I think some companies have paternity leave, some don't, right? Whereas the maternity leave is given thanks to the government guideline. But we need that kind of an equality and inclusion as well as we go through this, so that the paternity leave means that the women will get a break. Similarly, in the pandemic situation, right, I think a lot of new mothers are very happy because they feel that, hey, I can actually work from home, take care of my child, whereas a young mother has a separation anxiety. So being able to kind of have flexibility policies, being able to kind of regularize work from home, being able to allow the women to kind of dictate the pace of her working. I think those are some of the things required. I also find that when it is a D&I conversation, right, it's usually a women leader. And I know we have a dearth of role models, but it'll be great if men can stand up and talk about diversity, how perhaps they are a good cook, or how they have taken a lot of responsibility with regard to the kids' education. I think those kind of messages would also go a long way in terms of promoting diversity. And whilst we do a lot of this at Cognizant, in terms of driving this, I find that there is always more that we can do. Because, the balance, especially at senior management levels, is quite a bit, right? And we are trying to address why women at a certain level are actually going away from workforce. I think there was a recent article as well, right? And we're trying to understand, okay, what is the cause of it? How can we kind of make the whole environment more conducive for women associates? So I think that's a big challenge in today's time. So one is friendly policies, male role models, inclusive policies, also flexible policies for women to decide how they want to do, whether it's a part-time working or whether it is flexi working, hybrid models, as against when I decide I can go to the office and not. I think those are all some of the things we absolutely require. And more importantly, we need to demonstrate this in the culture of the organization, where when a woman approaches and say, you know what, I need to go into a flexi model, her career is not put at risk. Often that is what happens, right? Oh, I'm going to be passed over for a promotion. My rating is going to get impacted. I think that fear should be eliminated. Then all these conversations will start to gain a lot of momentum.
Yeah. So I think we understand diversity as differences, and that's exactly what it means, right? So there are terms: diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. A lot of our organizations are starting to talk about it, started to understand this. Just wanted your thoughts on how could we look at all of these in a more integrated way. So for the audience, I think what we are saying is diversity is about having a seat at the table. Inclusion is about having a voice at the table. Belonging is about the voice is being heard. And equity means we all have the same playing field.
Yeah.
So how do organizations, what's your advice on how do organizations start to look all of this in a more integrated way?
I think that's a great question, right? And as we are looking at this, one of the things is we have to somehow build this into the goals. And these goals, in my view, should be top down, right? So we know that, hey, when we say we are talking of goals, we are talking of contributions, hiring goals. We are talking of how your headcount is actually moving towards having, a diverse workforce. And whilst gender diversity has actually gained a lot of momentum, there are a number of things. I think with the recent laws in India, we are focusing now on LGBTQ hiring. And there's a lot of stuff that we need to do there, right? From creating workspaces that are conducive to the third gender, to also creating a culture where they can be free and they can be open, right? Then we are looking at obviously veterans. How can we help them? Then we are looking at obviously differently abled. And again, there are some of our offices which are extremely conducive for differently abled, wheelchair friendly, or we are looking at software that helps people who are, say, deaf and dumb, still process and code, right? I think we need to bring in those aids so that the disability is not seen as a hindrance, except that the tools are readily available for somebody with disability to come in and still perform at the same level, if not better, as a normal individual. Then we have the other component, which is not to exclude men, right? I think what I find is the moment we talk about female, and gender diversity, the men almost feel excluded, right? I notice this when it's a DNI event or we have a DNI speaker, the number of women who sign up to the number of men who sign up, right? And I'm thinking, well, it's not an exclusion event. It is an inclusion event. We don't want to exclude the men because then we can't affect change. Right. So we have to equally celebrate men, mental health, men's stereotyping, which is again huge in the Indian society, and how they can be more free. I mean, there's still a taboo around house husband in India, if I may say so. Right. How many men would proudly say, hey, you know what, I'm going to take leave because, I had a child and my wife is not availing maternity. I mean, that's very unheard of. Right. Whereas that is very common in other countries. The leave can be availed by either of the spouses when there's a child, depending on who takes up the child rearing responsibility. So I think some of those also we need to kind of come in, but a holistic program is important. Number one, it has to be linked to the performance goals. Number two, there needs to be dedicated DNI organization who's driving this. Often I find that people who are doing this also have a day job, which is more demanding, but we need a dedicated DNI organization with a combination of HR and business, which is there. And more importantly, I think this has to be reinforced grounds up that, hey, when you encounter the situations, these are acceptable remarks and these are not. For example, right, we have WASH committees when it comes to women's, harassment. We need similar committees for LGBTQ as well. What if they find bullying or harassment at work? Who do they go to, right? And I know we have that. Now, how can we kind of make that more public? How can we kind of encourage people to kind of talk about it? Now, how can we make people aware that, calling out someone like that is not acceptable? I think those are some of the things we need to talk. So it's about communication, goal setting, policy making, and more importantly, driving that agenda top down, saying, hey, this is really important and we need to do this. And there are enough statistics, and I don't have to share, right? Diverse organizations by definition do better than where there is a inequality in terms of the kind of people. So we need that. And last but most important, if I'm able to talk here, right, this is probably the freedom I enjoy. And this is something we need to take across the organization, across all levels, that people should be able to express their opinion, even when it is not the popular opinion. Often when it is popular, we hear more voices chiming in. But when it is not a popular opinion, people should be able to have the courage to say, you know what, it may not be popular, but I'll still say it. And I know there are no repercussions. I think building that is the biggest part of driving diversity.
Yeah. I quite liked the points that you mentioned, right? Having diversity, having LGBT plus community as your workforce, but you need to have similar laws of inclusion and belonging that you have for a women gender today. It is there. I think it's part of the Transgender Act that even compliance suggests that you should have a committee.
Yeah.
So moving on, Sailaja, this whole post-pandemic world, right? Hybrid working, etc. So this is about how is hybrid impacting idea, which is how is hybrid impacting the whole inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility, right? So on one side, this will improve diversity, is the thought process, right? So we will have more women coming into the workforce. There is flexibility. There would be more women wanting to upskill themselves because of the time available because of hybrid working. people with different ability, neurodivergent, etc., would be able to more get employed and working for organizations. Just wanted to hear your thoughts. So this is one side. What are the other things as an organization we should be taking care, right? Because on one side, we would improve diversity. But on the other side, even our workspaces are diverse. There is certain people working from office and there is a certain set of people working from home, proximity bias, etc. Would there be a leaking pipeline of the diverse workforce? Your thoughts?
I think there would be a leaking pipeline, right? And the reasons are, I think whether we like it or not, and we were discussing this, right? The homes have become more dependent on the women during the pandemic, right? Even when the lady was working before, right? Suddenly there's a sense of, oh, she's around, right? And there are various examples of it. Everybody now checks in with you more than what is required. And childcare and elder care burden continues to be on women, right? And post-pandemic, has childcare gone back to what it used to be? Not really, right? There's a lot of family and societal pressure if you want to put your child in daycare, right? Do you want to do that? Are you sure? So if a working woman is at home and she's unable to put the child in daycare, given the hours she does, again, that kind of restricts her flexibility. Those are some of the aspects on the personal front. On the work front, what the pandemic has done is the pandemic has taken away informal conversations. And, historically, we know that, networking, being able to talk to a wide range of people is very important for us to, progress with new ideas, innovation, also opportunity identification at a workplace. So all those, I think, drinking water and smoking conversations have gone anyway. And it is not very characteristic of women to ping somebody and say, hey, I'm going to have a virtual coffee with you. Let's connect. I think statistically men do it a lot more easier. Women don't.
It doesn't come naturally.
It doesn't come naturally, right? You have to kind of consciously put an effort into it. And some days it's physically not possible. Your calendar is so packed. You would not want to have another conversation, for the sake of networking or for the sake of progression. You're just looking at when do I close this and I get back to my to-do list at home. I feel that is what would introduce a bias, not a capability, but this invisibility created because somebody is working in a hybrid or a remote environment where they're only seen when there is an official meeting or a project meeting, but they're not seen otherwise, right? Whereas in an office, the person had more opportunity to be more visible, right? And often this could lead to, oh, I'm not in the know-how, or I'm not in that, close circle, or I've been passed over for something. I feel that is what will generate the leakage. The third one is, as we are also trying to balance between return to office and work from home. And we all know, right? I think when we are doing run, it helps to work from home. But if we want idea generation, innovation, new project incubation, it helps to have co-location, right? But if that co-location is forced, there will be certain workforce whose circumstances may not be conducive for it. Now, are we willing to kind of give them time to kind of go and find another role, or the rigidity that is there, or the lack of opportunity that would also drive the women to leave the workforce? So I think these are some of the factors. But for me, everybody is trying to figure out what is hybrid. We are all talking hybrid. Is 3 and 2 a hybrid? How does it work for people who do not work in a metro, right? We are now looking at tier 2 hub and spoke models to work. How does that work? What's the critical scale to have a hub and spoke model? But amidst all that, in say a tier 2 hub location, how many women are there and how can you network there so that you're still felt and seen when it matters? I think those are some of the challenges that women will continue to face, in my view. And where those opportunities are not present, I think automatically the women would be forced to kind of look for other roles.
So 2 connected questions, Sailaja. I think you very nicely told us about the challenges. Any suggestions that you have for our managers and for the women workforce or diverse workforce?
I think as managers, my only ask is appreciate the situation that the employee is in. And I say that for both men and women, right? One size doesn't fit all. Right? They could be extraordinary circumstances, or they could be going through a particular phase where they need more hybrid support. And I always say this, right? A new mother or maternity, it's typically until the child starts school. Once the child starts school, suddenly the mom becomes more free, right? So if we support that during that time, then you would kind of not lose a very competent employee, right? Or somebody's family is going through something, or there is elder care, which we are seeing as a recurring phenomena, right? Especially the pandemic, there have been long COVID effects where employees have to take care of them. I think be sensitive to that before we impose certain guidelines. I think that's for managers. For women, I think we have to lose the hesitation to ask for help when we need, right? We don't often discuss that, hey, this is a constraint for me. I can't do this right now. When I say I can't do this, remember, it's a temporary, it's a point of time or point in time kind of a conversation. It doesn't mean forever, right? But being able to kind of articulate it, share the challenge, present alternatives in terms of how one can be effective, I think that's very important. Often we kind of see the solution as, okay, I'm going to kind of hang my boots, right? Because we are afraid of asking. And also probably bouncing that idea off a few people, right? Say, hey, I'm thinking like this, what do you think? Also at home, probably having that discussion very openly, saying, I need support in these areas. Can I employ some help? Can I kind of have somebody take care of my baby with my supervision? Stuff like that, right? And the nuclear families have made it even more difficult to kind of have a trustworthy help at home. The good thing is in India, we get help. But the flip side is we need a lot of supervision when it comes to that help, right? How do you balance that? But don't shy away from asking for help, right? I think often the women thinks that every problem has to be solved by herself. And that's a huge burden. But if you can start taking help from extended family, immediate family, friends, work, and explain the constraints, but also provide alternatives on how one wishes to work through the constraints, I find that many organizations are actually supportive. I also find men hesitate to ask, right? Like, do you need help? I think I had somebody tell me that during an interview, they said, oh, I have a young baby. So the immediate question was, okay, if you're working, how do you plan to take care of the baby, right? Now, some may find it okay. Some may find that question offensive, right? So it is important to build a rapport so that actually those conversations are helpful. And the rapport has to be both ways. But I think as women, we have to ask for help, and we also have to demand what we need. Otherwise, we won't get it.
Yeah. So this actually stands for anybody with a difference, right? It stands for any diverse workforce. Anybody should be able to, yeah, you're right. Sailaja, the Indian BFSI domain has always seen successful leaders, right? And the gap, the gender balance is improving by the day. Yeah. We have lots of role models in this domain, and you yourselves is a very good example of having risen the ranks within the BFSI domain. What are your learnings, and what would you want to share with the audience today?
Definitely. I think BFSI domain has been a blessing for women who are progressing in the workspace, right? Innately, I feel women double check, right? That helps in a banking domain. Innately, we kind of have this ability to do checks and balances, and that's very much relevant in a BFSI domain. So I think from, that need for perfection is very important in a BFSI domain, because we can't even go wrong by a cent there, right? So I find always that in a banking environment, women thrive because of attention to detail, checks and balances, more importantly, high integrity, which is always seen amongst women, calling out red flags, especially in the current regulatory environment, right? Being able to kind of flag the red flags. You intuitively know that, there's something wrong with the story, and you would report it out. All those have contributed. And it also, I feel, provides an environment where women can work freely without, the fear of any repercussion or a bias. May not be, not all industries provide that, at least in the Indian context. So my ask again of the younger women who are coming into it, I feel we as a generation, Leenika, I'm sure you'd agree with it, we kind of went almost deep on the domain, right? Our early years of career was on developing the domain. That if you say I worked in a bank, then I know the nitty-gritty is all the way from the product, all the way to servicing, to the regulations and all. I almost feel the current environment doesn't allow somebody to become a specialist. And many are trying to become generalist, right? And that is probably the flip side, because with automation increasing, with new product launch, what will be called upon over and over again is that domain expertise, where we can sit and say, hang on, have you thought about this? this is the front to back model. This is how it works. This is how the fulfillment works. And these are what I see as challenges. And often I find that is what we present as value. But when we don't have the domain expertise, I feel that it could be a deterrent for anybody who is wishing to kind of progress career in the BFSI domain. And that's probably what I would call for, that people kind of go back and double click on the domain. They go back and understand that the processes, standard processes, how they work, and ensure that the controls are always in place and the risks are always addressed, which is what we do in our day-to-day life as well, right? We kind of preempt and proactively address risks, bring that into the work. And more importantly, when you see a red flag, put your hand up. They call it intuition, they call it gut. I think it works for me, right? And 90% of the time, my gut is right. When I say, hang on, something is totally wrong here or something is off here, right? It doesn't add up. You know that something is wrong. You might not have the facts to prove it as yet, but when you dig deep, you find it anyway. I think those are the characteristics I would ask people to hang on to. There are lovely banking, exams and courses now available, more than probably what were available when we were starting our careers, right? There are platforms which provide good courses on the domain. So people should kind of equip themselves on that. But more importantly, know that if they know the product, irrespective of automation, irrespective of which bank, I think they would do very well.
Yeah, our Six Sigma lens is what I call.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, Sailaja, I hear you as a great proponent of diverse allyship. You've spoken about it many times of how male allyship can support improving the gender balance in the workforce. So what are your suggestions? I know you spoke in a lot of content, even today, to say, male allyship would help. We should have more male taking the responsibility of bringing about diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging in organizations. So what are your thoughts on what should organizations do on male allyship? How can we promote more male allyship?
So I think a few things on that. And I say that only because in the senior positions, the majority are men. So for us to be able to bring about a change, we need the majority to sign up to the D&I agenda, right? All said and done, senior women leaders are a minority, right? So we talking about it almost at times, it is seen as defunct. Of course, she'll talk about diversity, right? So it doesn't necessarily have the punch, right? Male allyship comes from that we have senior male leaders who are advocates for women. They can be advocates. There is advocacy, who are actually mentors for women. And it is very visible that they are mentoring women. They are also people who I have found male allies. What they do is they're constantly on the lookout for talent. And when they find a talent, I often find that they find the talent and then they find a role. Our recruitment usually happens the other way, no? We kind of define a role and then we're trying to match somebody to that. I've seen that good male allies do the opposite. They find good women talent and say, okay, now where can I get this person into this thing? They're disruptive. They'll bring somebody, a women leader or an LGBTQ leader into a space which predominantly has been male dominated. But in the process, they bring somebody strong enough who can actually withstand that disruption, right? And more importantly, that male leader has to walk the talk in terms of recruitment, walk the talk in terms of, as I said, mentoring, sponsoring, being very present in all the D&I events, right? I mean, we had a while ago, we wanted everybody to wear pink t-shirts, right? To promote D&I. I actually had many men who wore pink t-shirts, right? Simple action, powerful message. I think that is what we need, because what happens is when a male leader does that, there is a whole successive team who follows that male leader, who would then become the converts. Otherwise, it is always seen as, okay, D&I, okay, a female leader is talking about it. Yeah, we let it, no, we'll skip. It's okay. Everybody talks about it. It's a tick in the box. But when a male leader talks about it and, starts to kind of pull up saying, hey, what are your stats? How are you looking at in terms of diversity? Have you considered the following people for hiring? How is your promotions looking? Suddenly, the conversation kind of changes in terms of getting more deeper and getting more serious. And there are many male allies. It's just that as organizations, how can we empower them and how can we kind of put them at the forefront of the communication? I think that's up to all of us.
So should this always be structured, Sailaja? Should this always be coming from organizations, or can women also ask for male mentorship, male sponsorship, or male allyship?
I think it definitely women can ask. I don't see any challenges there, Leenika. But I think innately, how many women put up their hand and say, hey, I need mentorship and I need sponsorship, right? And even more so, it is a much smaller minority when they say, okay, I know, for example, our CEO is there. I'd like to be mentored by our CEO. Very few would like to say that, right? What is surprising is actually when we tell them, hey, so-and-so felt that they could be mentored by you, these leaders are actually very open. They'll be like, oh, absolutely, let's do this. I've never seen one leader tell me they can't do it. I've never ever seen that. But nobody approaches them. Nobody asks them. Hence, I'm saying it needs to come more from the organization where you have a structured program and say, okay, these are the mentors, mentees sign up, we'll do a match, and then we'll kind of institutionalize it. So some structure is required to gain momentum. Otherwise, free flow, I feel that it doesn't impact the majority of the people.
Yeah, so I think very interesting insights, Sailaja, right from building cultural organizations. How could we integrate all aspects of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging? How is hybrid impacting the idea equations? A women BFSI leader, and we all look up to you, Sailaja. Absolutely phenomenal insights. And any last messages that you have before we kind of end this conversation?
I think maybe my ask, forums like NASSCOM, I think my ask would be to continue to influence policy making at a central level so that we are more inclusive in our industry. And I know, NASSCOM does phenomenal things in this space. We've seen that especially during the pandemic, right? And that's probably the ask, because once something becomes a policy, automatically the implementation of that gains a lot of momentum. That is one. Two is obviously talking about this with more real examples, almost like let's have a diversity playbook, that if an organization is embarking on a D&I journey, let's make a playbook available, let's make resources available. I know we spoke about it briefly during the conference, right? And we said these are all the must-haves, right? Then an organization say, okay, I now know what to do. Because I think there are many people who want to do this, but they're struggling. Okay, how do I go about this? Where do I start? And then the initial setbacks put them back, right? So I think that'll be kind of my second ask, I guess. But I think with that, we should be absolutely able to make a difference. And it's great. I mean, we see the younger generation, right? The girls are far more confident, right? And what I feel is that's probably our way of paying it forward, that the lessons that we have learned, hopefully we can share with the younger generation and they come in more confident and less biased.
Yeah. So I think to answer to your question, Sailaja, we are building a lot of content around diversity and inclusion on our community page. It's hosted, it's public information, NASSCOM Diversity and Inclusion, and there are a lot of inspiring community stories. And we look forward to getting more such community stories with which we could inspire the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Sailaja, for your time, and we look forward to connecting again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leenika. Pleasure talking.
Thanks.